Welcome, everyone, to our Fireside Chat focused on last week's Innovation Challenge in IBD that was run by Arena Pharmaceuticals and Lyfebulb. We're here today with three very important members of the event, but I want to say thank you to everyone who participated, including the 10 finalists and the 5 judges, and of course, our co-host, Arena Pharmaceuticals. This fireside chat, the goal really is to talk more with our winner, Trey with Coral Genomics, and also to get the perspectives from a venture capitalist, being our judge, Brad Vale, as well as a patient and a patient advocate, Tina Aswami Omprakash, who herself is living with inflammatory bowel disease. So welcome, Trey, Brad, and Tina.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you all to just say a few words about yourselves and maybe especially connect your personal story to IBD, being the therapeutic area of interest. I want to start with Trey.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karin. And it was an absolute pleasure to be part of the event and meet everyone there, and just a tremendous opportunity for us, and just inspirational to hear all the other companies working in the space as well. For me, I started off my career or education as an engineer. And as I was applying and getting into grad school, I was really excited about biomedical applications. Like many, I think, entrepreneurs in this space, there's always a family connection with disease. And, everyone's had someone in their life who's experienced something. And when I started my PhD, there were a lot of really cool innovations in the biotech space, including CRISPR and single cell sequencing that had kind of just come out. And it was this really exciting time to go from an engineer to having the tools in biology to actually do experiments that let you treat biology as an engineering system. And that's kind of been the thought process by which we entered, Coral as a company. Basically, how can we engineer population level diversity in a dish, community level diversity, I think, Karin, you said last week, which I liked a lot, such that instead of going through a trial and error process for patients to get access to medications in the real world, and instead of having really challenging clinical trial processes for drug development, we can potentially take a stab at doing that better in a dish as quick as possible. And that was kind of the inspiration behind Coral. We got into the autoimmune space, kind of inspired by my parents. My dad has inflammatory bowel disease. My mom has rheumatoid arthritis. And it's kind of a deeply personally motivating area to work towards. And that's kind of a bit about me.
Thank you. And Tina, obviously, I've already said that you are living with IBD, but not everyone who lives with Crohn's or ulcerative colitis gets so involved in advocacy or entrepreneurship the way you have.
Thank you so much, Karin, for having me here today. And for Trey, congratulations. Wonderful work done. And Brad, pleasure to be working with you. So my name is Tina, as Karin introduced me. I am living with Crohn's disease and a permanent ileostomy. I've had this for several years now, nearly 16 years. And I'm deeply passionate about advocacy and entrepreneurship in this space, given that I've had this disease and I've also seen so much innovation and so many new medications come out, and even surgical treatment options come out just in these last 16 years. Also, I have a very personal connection to this disease outside of myself, and that's through my father and some of my other relatives whose lives have been taken by Crohn's disease, turned into colorectal cancer. So this is very close to my heart in the sense that I want change for the community, and I want change for the South Asian community, which is very much budding in terms of the growth of the incidence and prevalence of inflammatory bowel disease around the world.
Thank you, Tina. And Brad.
Thank you. Nice to be here, everybody. I'm one of the founders and general partners at Trio Ventures. Our focus is innovation in medical devices, implantable and not, and also in digital health. I've had a long-term interest in diagnosis and therapy, anything we can do that helps us intercept the disease process earlier. And I really enjoy getting involved at this phase where we can help answer or ask initially and then answer the critical path questions and figure out how to efficiently get the work done that ultimately leads to improved patient care.
So Brad, thank you for that. And I think I want to turn back to you again, just immediately, for this stage of development. I mean, we saw 10 companies yesterday. They did range in their development stage, but they were somewhat, they're all, of course, private companies. They're, seed, pre-seed, Series A. What are the important, what would you advise entrepreneurs and leaders of those kind of companies to focus on at this stage? But what are some of the key components of success, as you've seen so many go through both success and failure?
Sure. I think it's fun, first of all, to be playing in disruptive things. I think Peter Thiel, I think it was 2014, his book, he called it 0 to 1. And basically he described that he didn't want to be the second or the third or the fourth innovation in an existing space. He wanted to create opportunities in totally new spaces because he selfishly felt like he had, at least initially, a monopoly there. So I think, I encourage people to think big and then maybe practically about, what's the right amount of money to chase the right 2 or 3 core questions that advance, what I'm doing. Do I have, a lot of the lean approaches that people have talked about utilize a very narrow path of asking the right questions before you even do anything, before you even spend money. Make sure you've talked to, not a couple of experts, but a dozen experts, and not a couple of patients, but a couple of hundred patients. So I think there's just a lot of there's a lot of contemplation you can do without diving into the checkbook and figuring out how to hire 6 C-level employees to help you drive a high-speed boat. Sometimes it's good to just sit there and make sure you're headed in the right direction before you leap in.
That's good advice. That's great advice. Because you see, especially I would say on the West Coast where the two of you are, thinking about, there are a number of tech companies raising a lot of money at a very early stage, and they may not actually at all have spoken to patients. They just have a technology, but they haven't checked whether this is relevant. And bringing it back to Tina, what is relevant to patients, not just relevant, but what is practical and possible. The companies that we saw last week, there were a few areas, and we talked about community connections. We talked about, symptom trackers that were more objective. We talked about comprehensive care models. And, we saw a number of different areas in the IBD space. What are you looking for as not just an N of 1 patient, but as, a community of patients? What are you seeking in the next few years to help you with your disease?
Karin, that's such a great question. And I think, having been in this space for about 3.5 years now, I just have to say, as an advocate, I just have to say that I'm so grateful for all the entrepreneurs, Trey included, and all of you included, for bringing this community together with new innovation. I think just the existence of companies like Lyfebulb to make these kinds of things happen is so heartwarming for patients like myself, because we know that not only are medications being worked on for us, there are ways to improve our quality of life, metrics to improve our quality of life that are coming about through, for instance, Trey's company with biomarkers. I mean, I was very impressed with with your description, Trey. Biomarkers are a key component of autoimmune disease. The predictability of autoimmune disease and how it will evolve over time is very difficult to sort of know compared to other diseases. For some people, it can be very progressive. For others, it can be quite mild. So I think biomarkers really honing in on that can be quite a clue to the future for a lot of us. But some of the innovative technologies that I've seen over the years, and also even last week at the Innovation Challenge, these sort of holistic systems that are looking at mental health, that are looking at diet and our care in a coordinated fashion to make the patient's life easier and the caregiver's life easier. I mean, I have to say that I really appreciate that. Navigating a disease as complex as IBD and all the extra intestinal manifestations that can come with it, we need that. We need people by our side and a system that'll support us. So seeing innovation like that also helps me to feel more comfortable about my future and the future of sort of medical homes. That said, another thing that I really appreciated is some of these technologies, whether it's sweat sensing technologies or even the toilet technology from Toy Labs, was just seeing that they're to try to see if there's blood in the stool, to try to measure fecal calprotectin levels through different ways, or to predict flares, or to get ahead of flare-ups through some of these technologies. What that can do for us patients to give us a little bit more predictability in terms of our work lives and social lives and studying lives. I think we cannot even estimate the effect that some of these innovations can have on our lives. So I'm very, very hopeful for the future. And I'm really looking forward to seeing more and more of this innovation come about.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Tina. And Trey, we've talked, you mentioned a little bit about your company and your intro, but I think it would be interesting to the audience just to understand some practical applications. You're early, but what is your goal? Tina said we will change the world, with some of these technologies, and for patients will be improved. But what are some tangible, examples of what your company could do for patients in the next few years?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I was just thinking back about kind of people who've been relevant in our journey, and my PhD advisor, Aviv Regev, she had this kind of framing of all her research as kind of like model, perturb, predict, and kind of go in a cycle between that set of things. Like for a biological system, we can make a model of it, do some sort of experiment to see if that model is correct, and then kind of revise the model iteratively. And I think kind of as we think about patient care in the autoimmune space, Tina mentioned biomarkers, like how well we can predict something that's going to happen, how well we can do an intervention like an experiment or a dietary change, and then how well can that feed back into a better model of how patients, how their disease course progresses. And I think that's kind of been a big area of interest of how do we translate some of this like basic biology into a model that's like bigger picture on a patient level. And that's kind of where we want to go with Coral is, our first application is essentially a blood-based clinical test to help patients and doctors decide on which medication is going to work for them. Right now, to make it concrete, and I'm sure Tina knows this better than I do, is often patients end up underdiagnosed and undermedicated, primarily due to insurance restrictions to start with, and then end up going through a fail first cycle of failed medications until they get one that maybe works or maybe it doesn't. And then they end up having surgery and awful complications. And like, imagine a world in which day one, you get the right drug, if it exists. Now, there's certain patients where there may not be a drug that exists. That's another area we're interested in working with pharma companies on exploring as well. Like, how do we make new drugs for them? But, one of the things we found in our clinical study is it's not just the biomarkers, it's not just the genomics. That's predictive, like looking at things like which medications the patients tried and failed in the past. Other information about their clinical history definitely helps build better and better models of patient response.
So it means that your model is iterative. It means that it needs to constantly learn and grow. And we're talking about machine learning in digital technology, but here we're talking about learning in a model that is more biological. Am I right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, we call it our Coral reef, which is kind of our repository of primary immune cells from diverse patient populations, and that keeps growing as we see more patients. And there, I think what's cool, like beyond kind of just biomarkers, is that we have these biological cells and we can actually do causal perturbations on them to look at, not just correlations, but does this change actually do what we think it should do to a patient? Maybe this is a new drug that looks like an anti-TNF, but has a more uniform response rate across patients. And I think that would be really cool.
Trey, I had one question. I think at the center of your story is something that on the one hand is exciting, on the other hand, it's a little scary, and that's your diverse primary immune cell repository. I got involved in a wound healing project a long time ago and started studying neutrophils and macrophages and fibroblasts and how they affect the inflammatory and the cleanup and the collagen laying down part of healing, wound healing. And I mentioned it to a researcher who said, oh, by the way, there are 28 different, and this is 15 years ago, 28 different subtypes of fibroblasts that lay down at least 3 different types of collagen. And so when I get to the part of your story about single cell sequencing, I still have that. It's exciting and it's scary that there's 128,000 kinds of primary immune cells.
Yeah.
If you could talk a little bit about it, it's sort of a scale question. So on the one hand, you're drilling down, you've got that diverse population, you've got unique individual cells, and then getting back to insights through machine learning or AI, whatever you use to get to whole patient insights, just how I guess it goes back to your
bridge kind of scales of biology all the way through a patient. Yeah, it's a great question and something we struggled with, especially IBD as far as autoimmune conditions goes. Like there's a microbiome component, there's an epithelial component in the gut, and then there's the systemic immune system. So there's that kind of scale of biology, and then within the immune system, there's T cells, there's B cells, there's macrophages, there's monocytes, as you mentioned, right? A whole spectrum of cell types. That said, a lot of the biological therapies used today are kind of like blunt hammers being applied to the immune system generally. And so it's not like there's that many therapies that are like macrophage targeted anti-TNF, specific. Like they're a bit more blunt. And so I think there's cases in which we feel we have a decent model where the immune cell subsets we're studying and the responsiveness to anti-TNF therapy actually do predict clinical response of patients. And that's the gold standard at the end of the day, which is what our clinical study was designed to test. And then there's cases in which we don't think we'll be able to do the best job until we do more complex culture models. For example, there's a drug that targets an integrin receptor on the gut epithelium, so it prevents the T cells from kind of getting in. And so if you only have T cells and immune cell subsets in the blood, but you don't have any epithelium from the patient, it's hard to really make that model. So I think there's things we're going to do well soon, and then there's things that might take a little bit more work to figure out.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and it's a good answer, and I think it's an honest answer. That your model currently is applicable to existing drugs, but future drugs you may have to modify your model to, and that's fine, because that's the way you grow a company. Tina, we did talk about some of the other companies, and I know that you are fortunate in a way that you're being treated in New York City at Mount Sinai, which is, the epicenter or the foundation of Crohn's disease, especially when Dr. Crohn was there, and they have a good model. Not every patient in this country or in the world, for sure, has that kind of access, and we saw several companies trying to address that. Anything you want to, if our fellow entrepreneurs are listening, anything you want to give them guidance on in how to make that model work for all patients?
Absolutely. I think that's a fantastic question. And I'm glad that you're bringing this up, Karin, because here's the thing, like even in the past, when, maybe 5-7 years ago, I was having to travel out to the Cleveland Clinic and Mayo Clinic to have surgery or surgeries corrected or to get into clinical trials. That's not the case anymore. New York is the epicenter of at least the United States and probably the world for IBD care at this point in time. And I think that we've come such a long way, and we have to look at models like we heard Dr. Marla Dubinsky speak the other day, and co-founders Dr. Dubinsky and Dr. Kiefer of Trellis Health. And I've heard them speak about Trellis Health. I've looked at models like Trellis Health's, and I see that as being having tremendous potential. The reason why,
including Oshii, GI Track, and LA,
exactly,
who were competitors to Trey.
Exactly. And those three came up, and I thought they all had wonderful business models and could really target this well, depending on how cost coverage, insurance coverage would work, and also that multidisciplinary aspect of making sure that there was in actuality a real IBD specialized dietitian or a real mental health practitioner who understands not just GI conditions, but specifically inflammatory bowel disease. I think that this is a huge challenge in our community, because you might find a dietitian, you might find mental health practitioners, but to have to catch them up and bring them up to speed of what living with IBD, and that too for many young people, is like, and the things that we go through on a daily basis is very, very difficult. And to have that multidisciplinary care work well, we really do need IBD specialists of all kinds. Even the GIs have to be IBD specialists. So I think if these companies, their models like LA, like you mentioned, and Oshii, I think if they can work with insurance companies side by side, can work with some of the best IBD centers in the country to bring that care to people's homes, because let's face it, you look at rural areas in the middle of America where people are being diagnosed with IBD left and right. They have to travel 4, 5, 10 hours to get the kind of care that I can get here in New York. And that's simply just not fair. Talk about disparities. So I think if we're looking to eliminate some of those disparities and actually do justice to these patients' health, we would have to come up with these robust models to make sure we're involving some of the best people in the field to make sure people are getting the care that they deserve. There's a lot of complex cases around the country, Karin. It's just, it's really eye-opening, some of the things that I'm hearing.
And I think that's one thing we had 2 inspirational speakers in addition to 10 finalists, one being you, and great personal speech, your story is so compelling, but also, of course, Dr. Marla Dubinsky, who said that, after 25 years of being a clinician, I'm now trying to scale my practice through Trellis Health. And
exactly.
and that is interesting, that concept. Brad, we hear a lot here on diversity, and diversity is an important word. I mean, Trey is really focusing on it in his community in a Petri dish, and Tina, of course, advocating for it as a venture capitalist, where the return is what you are, looking for. How does diversity play in here? Do you look at diversity at all? Is that something that is important and in for your investments, or for the company setup as you look for success?
Yeah, I think it manifests itself as kind of an open-mindedness to a diversity of views, insights, patients that we are going to treat, that makes it a bigger market. So I think I guess maybe I'm an old simple-minded guy, but it sort of comes forth naturally in a lot of what we do, from teams we build and the patients we treat, because it's all about, bigger markets and making sure we don't have ever a narrow insight that's going to make us not look over the fence into the right place we should have been looking. I was going to ask Trey a question about, with all the companies we heard speak last week, there was kind of a bucket of symptom trackers, some of those integrated into full care management patients. There were, cytokines or other metabolites. people looking at secreted or excreted or sampled, even biopsies. Is there anybody on that, the other competitors, when you were listening, that made you say, boy, I got to get to those folks. They're doing the most complementary, the most interesting, or I want to use them to do my clinical trial, or I want to use them to help me understand cytokines better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I was talking to Karin about this right after, just that one of the biggest challenges in our clinical studies is we typically only get 2 time points on patient severity measures, and we get it before and we get an after they started a treatment. And so, if you catch a patient in the middle of an acute flare, their severity is going to go down, but that might not directly be the treatment. That just could be because you only have 2 time points. So getting that longitudinal trajectory on the patient care, and there's a bunch of cool companies in that space. I think we need to start working with at least one, if not more, of them to, I think that might be something we put the prize money towards, is like setting up more infrastructure in that for our clinical studies. And then Karin, to echo a little bit on diversity, because it's something, we talking to venture capitalists have to really try and convince them that there's a return, right? There's a really cool story in drug development, my favorite, on PCSK9 inhibitors. And these are drugs that help control lipid levels. And in natural human populations, they found mutations in this gene. And there were families with mutations of this gene that almost never got a heart attack, and other families that did get a heart attack really quickly, really early age. And they were kind of opposite yin-yang like sides of the mutation. And the protective mutation occurred at like a 20x higher frequency in African-American patients. No. And so I think that like those cases of like, let's look at real world populations, the extremes of diversity that we have from our evolutionary history, and like use those insights to drive new discovery, I think has a lot of potential, and it's just understudied.
Yeah, I want to give another example on that, which is the kind of the opposite in a sense, is that as you probably, I'm not sure how familiar you are in the lupus therapeutic area, but lupus is a disease that affects primarily African-American women. And the only drug that is approved to date is a drug that is not applicable to African-American women. So the studies that were done, essentially showed that it didn't work in this population, but a lot of money was still put forward to market and promote this drug that is treating a very small portion of the population, and there still is no second drug. So it's interesting when we start looking at it. I remember from the time when I was just an analyst studying new drug launches for a public fund. And I remember the AstraZeneca drug Iressa, which only worked in Japanese women. So this whole, I think what you're doing at Trey is gonna be very important going forward for drug companies as they look at new drugs and see where these drugs are applicable, and then connect them back to the TINAs and the community portals such as Lyfebulb, and see where are these patients, what kind of distribution, what are the patient journeys, how are we going to target the patients that actually are afflicted by the diseases, and how are they affected? Are they seriously affected? Do they have the support in the community to actually use these drugs? Do they have the insurance coverage? And then companies need to determine whether it's worth it to pursue, or if they have to build more infrastructure to pursue it in the right possible way.
Karin, that's such a good point. And if you don't mind me adding a little bit to that as well, like I think that's why I'm so passionate about diversity in clinical trials, and that I myself participate when possible. For me, specifically, I remember speaking to a couple of physicians about this of South Asian descent, and they were like, it's not, surprising to us that you didn't respond to other biologics given the intensity of disease that you had, but that you responded to ustekinumab in clinical trials. They're like, we're seeing better response in the South Asian population with fistulizing disease to ustekinumab. Obviously, that's anecdotal. There's been no studies done. The reality is that South Asians, in general, a lot of us really struggle to go into studies. There's a lot of mistrust in our community as well. But that's why I'm so passionate about this, because there's different phenotypes of disease, present in different populations, the Middle Eastern population, Far East Asian, South Asian, whatever. And in the African American population, how are we going to get to those treatment options unless we participate in those trials and in those research, and the kind of research that Trey is doing? And that's what drew me to Trey's the work as well, when we were, judging on this, and when I was listening to a lot of the stories, is we need a lot more personalized care, especially in some of these autoimmune areas, like you were mentioning, like lupus.
And just to complete that thought, when you see a slightly different response in a patient or a slightly different course, that's the exciting thing that could lead to something that's good for everybody. We learn a little bit more about the mechanism or a weakness in the mechanism of the particular disease.
Yes, exactly. But we've come up far. We come pretty far because, if we know that until the 1980s or so, women were not even included in clinical trials. And we're not talking diversity, we're talking gender here. We have 50% of the population. In many of the trials, even now, female animals are not included. It's only male animals. So, we do have a long way to go still to include the whole population. But I'm still here, in a very positive. I think we're here and very, very positive on what we're seeing, especially in the IBD space and in the autoimmune space in general. And when I speak to venture capitalists, and we'll see if Brad agrees, there's been a huge emphasis on cancer for the past 10, 15 years. I mean, the amount of money going into the cancer space and immunology, immune therapy, but it's shifting now toward autoimmune disease, and many of the learnings in immunology, I think we can make applicable into autoimmune disease. And that's exciting. I mean, I find IBD, MS, type 1 diabetes, which is my own disease. I mean, that's very interesting to see what we're learning. And hopefully in the next 5 to 10 years, we're finally going to see, not just disease modifying therapies, but something that really makes a difference in patients' lives. So I'm very hopeful. So any final thoughts, comments on just this concept of patient entrepreneurships, innovation challenges that are more, I would say, friendly than competitive? And
I discovered an inverse relationship between the length of your written presentation and who won.
So Trey was good at the elevator.
What's the p-value on that, Brad? No, I think they were really fun. I think as a small company, often you grow in a silo and kind of are working on a focused mission. And we're in a shared incubator space right now with 40 other companies, and it's just always, even if you're not working in the exact same space, I mean, I don't think there's any other companies here that are working on IBD, but just there's always like these really cool synergies that kind of pop out, and building communities, whether that be patients, whether that be a network in entrepreneurship, or whether that be other companies, it's always valuable.
Yeah, well, thank you. I want to thank all of you for this great discussion. I think we could have continued much longer, and I hope we will in other forums. And I want to just end with, we have another few days to apply. And Trey, you could apply, but I'm not asking you to do so. But we have another innovation challenge that is ongoing. It's an innovation challenge that focuses on the impact that global pandemics such as COVID-19 has on public health, inequity, and healthcare delivery. So technologies that address public health inequity, and healthcare delivery that were impacted by the global pandemic, such as COVID-19. That's on our website now, lyfebulb.com. And anyone who's listening, anyone who's an entrepreneur, actually not just a patient entrepreneur, but entrepreneur who has a company, can apply. And we're seeing a lot of interest. We're doing this together with Loyola University of Chicago and the Parkinson School of Public Health. So do consider applying. But to all of you, thank you so much. And we will stay in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.
Bye, guys.